I think it's just putting your best foot forward and understanding like even the personality types and things like that. That's not the only part of your resume, and like numbers aren't the only part of your resume. But I think holistically, it helps paint a picture of where you've been and where you feel like the Lord might be leading you to go. Hello and welcome back to A Higher Purpose, a Vanderbloemen podcast. I'm your host, Brett Connolly, and joining me as she does every week, my co-host, my co-worker, my co-friend, Sarah Gonzalez.
It's me.
What's up? Welcome back.
Thanks. Happy to be back. I'm surprised you're here.
I'm back.
I'm kidding.
I did it.
Okay, well, we're really excited today to have a conversation. If you are just now tuning in and you don't know what we do here at Vanderbloemen, we are an executive search firm. And today with us, we have two of our recruiters on our team. And I'm really excited to get this conversation started. We have Ellie and Emily. Thank you both so much for coming on the show. We're so excited. We're going to get to hear all of their advice, all of their do's and don'ts of some of the things that they do. So first, before we get started, tell us how you guys got to Vanderbloemen. What did that look like for you guys to be in the seats that you're currently sitting in?
Yeah, well, thank you, Brett and Sarah, for having us. So excited to be here. Journey to Vanderbloemen was kind of it's a very God story, which I love. So I was actually working at a church full time. My role was part youth pastor, part marketing, like digital side of things. A small church out in Rosenberg, Texas, and we loved it. And it was really supposed to be our long-term set and goal. My husband and I, we got married at the church, and we're like, we're gonna stay here for quite a bit, and we loved it. So fast forward to about, I would say maybe a week after we got back from our honeymoon, our senior pastor pulled me to the side, said, hey, no, it's been kind of a wild couple of months, but we need to have a conversation about the church's finances. And so we knew they were kind of in some trouble, and he was just very graceful in that moment of just sharing layoffs are starting to get on the table, so I think it may be time for you to kind of look elsewhere. Unfortunately, that's kind of a story that sometimes happens, and so it was a moment where my husband and I just had to really rely on God in those moments, and just trying to figure out and make sense of what was happening. And we so my senior pastor was very graceful and recommended me to start looking around. So hopped on LinkedIn, turned on my open to work, and was just praying for some kind of miracle. And this guy messaged me named Brett Connolly.
What a weirdo.
Miracle worker.
And I'm not going to lie.
Miracle man himself.
And I'm not going to lie, I thought it was spam. And I was going to close it out and just, whatever. And I asked my senior pastor, who was walking by my office, and I was like, have you ever heard of Vanderbloemen? And he's like, yes. Oh my gosh. They have great stuff. I've used some of their things before. And he's like, why? And I said, well, someone from their company just reached out to me. They want to have a conversation. What do I do? And he was like, you need to really pursue that. And so, I don't know, maybe a week later, it ended up to where I was starting to pack up my office and getting ready to leave and to step into Vanderbloemen. And so, been here for almost 2 years now, which is kind of crazy.
That's awesome.
Flown by so fast, but loved every second here. So
That's awesome. Really cool. Side note is that you found her and she found me on LinkedIn.
Wow.
And I also thought it was a scam. I went to my husband and I was like, this is fake, right? This is not real.
This isn't a real thing.
He was like, you've never heard of Vanderbloemen? And I was like, have you? He was like, yes. And he was like, respond right now. And I I was like, oh, okay.
Okay.
So, cool full circle moment.
So
that is
story.
cool.
And then there's Ellie Island.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Ellie Island. No. Okay, Ellie, you tell us, how did you get here?
Well, I do have a fun fact. So I actually went to a Vanderbloemen Christmas party before I even started. So I have connections, but just different kind of connections.
Okay.
But yeah, so I went to A&M, Gig'em. I got a degree in chemical engineering. I graduated May 2020, which is
What? Hold on.
Yes.
You have a degree in chemical engineering?
I do,
didn't know
yes.
Now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, keep going. Wow.
And she's like, let's recruit.
She's like, yeah, let's recruit. Forget about this
And
chemicals.
she's great at it.
Amazing.
Yeah, so I graduated May 2020. Obviously, COVID happened. I was like, I don't know if I want to work at a refinery. Obviously, all the stress of COVID. I really felt like the Lord was calling me to work at my church that I went to for college. And then, so I did a 2-year program. I worked with kind of elderly and then also missions. And I really enjoyed that. It was a 2-year program. So I was like, I don't know what I want to do next. I really like missions, kingdom minded, but also like I really miss using my like engineering brain. And so I really wanted to find something that kind of combined both of those. And so I found Vanderbloemen. I knew someone else who previously worked here. So she told me that I might be interested. So I applied, and then I also talked to Brett. Yes. And Isaac was about 2 weeks old at the time. So,
Yeah.
yes.
Wow. And that's my son. He is now 2 years old.
He's so
Wow.
old.
Yes. And I'll be here.
Wow.
Yeah, I'll be here
What-
2 years next month.
What made you say yes to the Christmas party? Like, what was the timeline? Were you already interviewing?
No.
I just
No.
happened
How
to be in
did you get
town.
invited?
I just happened to be in town.
How'd you get invited?
Mutual friends.
Oh my gosh, that's
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
crazy.
Connections.
Connections.
Connections
You're
are
so
important. That's a big part of
She
it.
just hopped over the fence and was swimming.
She just showed
I
up
did
at the
not.
house.
I feel like the message from our stories is, 1, check your LinkedIn messages.
Yes.
And
Check your
2,
messages.
True.
just, answer the invite. And
Answer invites.
Yeah, see what the Lord does.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Take that faithful next step.
Yeah,
You know?
Yes.
I think there's something to
kind
it.
of what this is about.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're really excited to have both of you on the pod today because, we were talking very early on in this kind of brainstorming of what is the purpose of this, being a good steward of this one life that we're given, and saying, hey, some episodes we're going to have kind of a broad stroke, kind of in the macro, but then other episodes we're going to be more in the micro of here are trends we're seeing, here's some stuff that we think would be helpful for individuals to hear. And 2 of our best recruiters that, yes, a lot of people look at Vanderbloemen and say, hey, we do a lot of client work, we're working with faith-based organizations, we're working with churches, we get to do a lot of those things, but there's also the candidate piece, and so recruiters are really at the front end of that process, and you get to see the good, and I'm going to say the less good, and sometimes the less good, you go, there's really good stuff there, but maybe they don't know, maybe there's some coachable moments. And truth be told, like what we are as a company is not coaching or critiquing resume building, but I think this can be a platform to have some of those conversations and say, hey, here, as we're looking at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of resumes, here are some trends that we see. Here's some like best practices. Here's things that pop out while we're looking at resumes, and here's some things that can kind of make your resume sink to the bottom, and so that's why we wanted to have these 2 on today. And one, y'all are planners, y'all are y'all want to be prepared. That is very in the engineering brain, and so y'all were like, let me make some bullet points, let's get prepared. And I love it because there's a lot, and this is one of those conversations I think if done poorly, we can talk about everything and nothing all at the same time. And so, we can talk about interviewing, we can talk about, I think those are other topics for other episodes. I think the heart of this episode today is the resume, kind of the do's and the don'ts and best practices, and some of the formatting things. And so I believe the first one, correct me if I'm wrong, was kind of that formatting piece. What are some of those best practice format things that you've seen help people rise to the top?
Yeah, great question. So I would say formatting is the first thing that we see when we see a resume. Formatting can really turn us on or off a resume quickly. I know at least in our work, we really try to read every resume, but I know in other organizations, they have 3 seconds with a resume and then they don't look at it again if they don't like that format. And so formatting is a huge thing. You need to have your name at the top, really good contact information. We want to be able to contact you through email and through phone number. You don't necessarily need all of those other specific things. LinkedIn is always helpful, having those sort of URLs, or even like teaching samples, sermon samples, things like that. So we want to be able to contact you. That's always important.
I would agree with the contact information because I have been in 2 separate situations where the candidate did not put their email address or their phone number, which was I could not reach out to them. Like there was nothing I could
Yeah.
do. And I was like, man, like I have to lose out on this candidate because
Right.
they didn't put that. And make sure it's updated too. Like I think we see that a lot of times where there's old email addresses, you know, from college or something that you don't check anymore. And then
From an old company.
Yeah,
you don't have
let's follow
access
that
to.
thread because that happens to us quite a bit. Of
Mhm.
like maybe a younger candidate, instead of putting their personal email, they put their church email
Yeah,
or something,
or school
or their
email.
school,
Yeah.
or and it's like all of a sudden, even if they are engaged with us, we're taking next steps, and those calendar invites are going onto their work calendar,
Yes.
and you're like, maybe do that on your personal one. That'd be good.
Yeah.
That, and like if that doesn't work out, maybe that's not the role that the Lord has intended for that individual.
Yeah.
We're able to stay in contact well after you leave whatever position
Yes.
you're in, and that email
Right.
address doesn't exist anymore. So I would recommend using that personal one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of formatting, just a question. What is the hot take on putting a profile picture on your resume?
That's a great question.
That's a great question. I think it is really up to the candidate themselves. I don't think I want to say makes or breaks a candidate's chances. I think if you want to, you know, if you're looking at a resume as like a sales pitch for yourself and you want to be able to put that face on there and to kind of show a little bit of who you are and put a face with a resume, I think it's more than welcome to. If you're going to do it, don't make it the whole page. Probably make it top right hand corner or left hand corner, you know,
no
whatever.
collage.
No
Right.
collage, you know. Some, you know, it's
Make sure
basically
it's professional.
yeah, basically if you're going to put on your LinkedIn profile, that should probably be the picture that's on
Okay.
your resume.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
Yeah, and I've seen some of those pictures before, and you're just like, it can work against you. You know, you're just like, oh, why did you land on that one? Nothing bad, but it's like I don't need your family holding bunnies in
Sure,
this.
seen
Like
that
we've
one.
See that?
and
Professionalism is important with a
Yeah.
picture.
putting your best foot forward. And I had an old student approach me maybe a few months ago, and he was like, hey, could you look at my resume? And he had a picture of him and his wife, and he's well-rounded, loves sports, loves the outdoors, does so many things. And his picture that he had with his wife, he was wearing a cowboy hat. And I was like, there's nothing wrong with that, but I know you're applying to a wide range of organizations and churches. Be mindful that one decision is kind of typecasting yourself. And it's like,
Interesting.
they're going to look at that resume, or maybe they won't. They'll just look at the picture and go, that's us or that's not us.
Right. Like it may
You know,
not feel like
it's kind of that knee-jerk reaction. It's like, be mindful of even like those small details if you are going to use a picture.
And then another big thing is having your current role first. I know sometimes we see candidates have their most like farthest back in time role first, and we want to see your most relevant experience because that's just the basically top to bottom would be most important to least important on your resume. And so we want to see your most current and most relevant experience at top, and then reverse chronological order from there.
Yeah. I know, Brett, you and I were talking that you kind of had a sentence that kind of describes that of don't show me. I mean, you said it, but I forgot.
I'm not sure which sentence, but
He
but
talks a lot.
I say things and sometimes I forget them. But
Okay.
I think I was joking with you where I was like, man, if I wanted to go on an unexpected journey, I would watch The Hobbit or read The Hobbit and not read resumes. Like I want to start with, give me the meat and potatoes. Give me the content that we think you're most applicable for this next position. I don't need to know that you worked at Blockbuster, in 2006.
In 1990.
You know,
It's
like
now
what-
closed.
It's now closed.
There's one still open. Pay some respect.
There is there's one.
Yeah. So I think that's really important, and I see that more often than you would expect.
Yes.
Where I think they just kind of want to start like, hey, with internships, things of that nature. But do you think formatting wise, it's as important as it used to be to have everything be on one page?
I don't think so. I mean, now I wouldn't say make it 5 pages or a novel of some sort. But, I think I've seen it done well when you do it on 2 pages. But I think it also depends on the experience that you're putting in there and how long you've been in the workforce or that industry. But
I would say 1 to 2 pages of your work experience, but maybe if you want to add a page of your ministry philosophy, maybe more of a cover letter kind of thing, that could be added as a separate page within your resume kind of file. So that's what I would recommend.
I heard a tip too the other day that if you've been at a company for a long time, but your roles have kind of like shifted at that company, to put at the top like Vanderbloemen 2015 through present, and then list out the roles
and what you've done in each of those roles
yes
separately.
Instead of being like Vanderbloemen January 2024 to present, and then like, because then they would only take one glance,
right,
and they would only think that you'd been there.
And you're like, you've been jumping around a lot, and you're like, no, you've actually been at the same organization for a while.
Yeah, and I never thought about that. I don't. Somebody told me that on the recruiting team. So way to go,
you
guys.
can see how you've grown within that organization, which is really great to see.
Right.
Yeah, it's a different way to format it.
Yeah, and I think maybe the two of you can agree of like, I see that as a pitfall too of people with applicable experience. Maybe it's not full time, maybe it's residency stuff, maybe it's internships. Again, not leading with that, but not feeling the pinch to have everything be in one page. And you dive deeper into it and you're like, oh, you have a lot more experience than you were letting on. You're not even telling your whole story.
Right.
Or like you might see something or not see something to where you go, that's probably in the right fit because you don't have enough experience. But in reality, you do. You were just trying to format it a certain way.
Yeah.
Right.
You know? And so I wouldn't get caught personally in that I have to have it be one page.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have it be more than 3 at the very most. Sometimes we get the mega resumes. And it's like there's a time and a place, and like that it's great that you've done all of those things. But my opinion is a resume is more of a handshake, not a conversation. And so that's where the cover letter comes in.
That's a good way to put that.
Because you can say like the cover letter is telling the end of it, like the company, the organization, hey, I've done research and here's why I feel like I could be a good fit. It's hard to do that in a resume.
Yeah. And even with that too, I've seen some candidates who will decide to format their resume into like almost like a storybook of just paragraphs of what they've done. And even to where it would start, like, I was born on blank, blank, blank. And it's like, and there's no paragraph break or anything, no bullet when there's nothing. And there could be some great stuff in there. And it, like you said, that's, again, it's a handshake, not a conversation. And it's like, well, what are you doing right now? And I'm having to go all the way down to the bottom and barely even find it for that. So it's not a storybook. Don't make it a novel. But
Fair.
Yeah, and following that thread, do you have a preference? Have you seen an advantage to like the job that they're currently in or previously in, some sentences or bullet points? What would your recommendation be?
I'd say bullet points for sure. It's easier to see. And then you're able to kind of separate separate tasks or projects that you've done in that role. Yeah. So I think it's very helpful. And even LinkedIn has it tailored that way as well.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
It's definitely easier to go through. But I would say try to at least have one thing that you did in each role, because we've also seen resumes where it just has their job and their what it is and then the years that they were there and nothing that they did. And so we don't know maybe what they accomplished, what they learned, what they liked in that role. And so there's just a lot of unknowns that we don't have in that as well.
Yeah. Right now, kind of I feel like a hot button thing to put on your resume is personality tests. What kind of stands out to you guys? Like, I know there's so many, like Strengths Finders, Enneagram. Is any of that helpful for you guys when you're like first glance looking at a candidate for a certain role?
Vander Index.
Vander Index.
Yes.
Vander Index
I'm
is
so sorry. How could I
Very
forget?
helpful.
Like, what does that look like for you guys? Is that helpful on a resume? Should people, take that and get to know themselves better when presenting themselves on that piece of paper?
Yeah, I think we're seeing it more and more where even clients are taking the test to their staff, and so when they're approaching us with, hey, we really need a galvanizer on our team, and if someone's able to put that on their resume, like, that is great. If you've done any kinds of those personality assessments that, especially if they're recent or with like you've done it in the past year or two that are pretty, like, that's kind of similar to what you're doing right now, definitely would recommend it. Wouldn't make it probably at the top of your resume, probably a little bit towards the end, like where if you're going to put
side
any
column.
or side columns.
Okay.
But yeah, I think they can honestly be a great great addition to your resume, and tells us a little bit more about you beyond just your experience.
Yeah.
I would say it's more important to know what your results means and how to communicate it than actually to have the test on it.
Yeah, you need to be prepared to talk about it if the interviewer asks you about it, because it's there.
Yeah, like how William always talks about being an Enneagram 7, and he knows what that means and how he works in that way. And so a candidate being able to do that about their own personality tests is probably more valuable than just listing them.
Nice.
It's good. And then we're all for a humble leader, you know, but I think sometimes people get gun shy, get a little shy in regards to highlighting numerically what they've been doing. But talk to us a little bit about that, of like, how much do you recommend putting numbers? Is that even something valuable? I have my opinions. I'd like to hear yours.
At least with my opinion, like, I feel like giving us numbers is like amazing. Like, if you can give us statistics on what you've done, like, that is incredible for us to know. Because I think when you use keywords like led or organized, or, you know, it's very subjective. So if you say, oh, I lead classes blank, then I don't know, okay, like often, then I'm like, okay, what does often mean to you? Does that mean
Exactly
12 times a year? Does that mean once a month? What is that? So I think that's important to tell us, you know, even if it's a smaller number than what you feel like you could have done, like, even if there's some kind of growth, like, that's what we want to see.
Yeah. Even like if you're looking for a senior pastor and the congregation's 2,500 people, and this other person said that they led a congregation, but maybe it's a congregation of 200, then like that might not be a fit. Could be, but like those types of numbers I feel like are more helpful in that long run too.
Yeah. I'd say organization size is very important to know. And then even for our nonprofits and schools, it's important to know, like, maybe how much you fundraised, how much you grew the organization, how many staff you're leading. So just kind of those numbers that we can kind of gauge what the experience is. But I would say growth is important. And I know that we as believers obviously want to be humble, but a resume is a way to kind of show what you've done and what you want to do. And then later in maybe interviews and other things, you can be more humble and more self-aware in that way.
I think it's just putting your best foot forward and understanding, like, even the personality types and things like that. That's not the only part of your resume, and like numbers aren't the only part of your resume. But I think holistically, it helps paint a picture of where you've been and where you feel like the Lord might be leading you to go. And one of the worst things that we can try and do as recruiters or consultants is assuming things, like, and that's why I think those numbers help, the personality types help, of just getting to know the individual and hearing their story and how, like, the Lord's been working in their lives. So I think numbers, while some people are like, that's not why I'm in ministry, totally get it. Like, that's I totally understand. But as you're looking for other opportunities, that's helpful for us just to know, like, could you thrive in this position? Right? Can you scale to what the needs are of this space?
Yeah, that's huge.
Or would you be swimming in it and you'd be miserable, the organization would be miserable, and ministry can't be thriving? Like, that's not a win for anybody, you know? So we'd much rather know some of those common numbers or scalability components to say, this could be a good fit.
It doesn't disqualify you. Like, it's necessarily, like, it's not like ooh, you only raised that much, or like, oh, you only led a congregation. It's genuinely so helpful, like you said, because you don't want to be in the wrong place of where you'd be swimming and miserable and
or vice versa.
And
I think along that vein too, it's important, like, when you are listing, you know, you have the organization name and, you know, the different bullet points. I've seen some pitfalls of where candidates will put what the organization did, but not what they did. And so they'll say the church did an outreach program. Well, what was your role in that? You know, did you plan it? Did you organize it? Did you recruit? You know, so I think it's important to not just like put those numbers in, but put what was your contribution to that? Because that helps us so much to make sure we, you know, you're setting up for success in your next role.
That's good.
And what can be tough with numbers is if you're not keeping them in front of you, they can kind of be like the fish you caught last summer, where as summers progress, they get a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger. And so y'all have mentioned the importance of updating your resume.
Yes.
And so it's not just like trying to remember what happened 4 years ago, 2 internships ago, 3 positions ago, whatever that is. Talk to us about keeping those resumes updated, how frequently you would recommend doing that. What does that look like?
I'd say we at Vanderbloemen recommend about every 6 months, both just updating your resume. Even if you haven't changed roles, nothing really much has changed. It's just a good way to just kind of briefly go over and see if anything's changed, but also our candidate profile, bringing it into Vanderbloemen. We also recommend updating that as well, just to refresh anything, contact information, if you've moved, even small things like that.
Yeah. I think the term updating your resume kind of has like had a bad undertone of like, oh, what are you doing? I'm updating my resume. And it's like, oh, are you okay?
Yeah. Are
And
you not happy
Yeah,
here?
Right.
And it doesn't have to be that, you know, it can just simply be remembering again those key milestones,
Yeah.
key things that you're doing, and just making sure that's being marked in there.
Yeah.
And even things like contact information, like if you changed your address or
Right.
where your phone number, update it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that when the time comes when you are looking, you don't have that level of stress of trying to start from the beginning and just create a whole new resume from scratch.
In your past couple of years being here, and obviously you guys see so many resumes on the daily, every week, every month, all the things. What are some things that it's like, oh, that candidate, like now that I've talked to them, they have so much potential. Their resume does not reflect that. Like, what are some things that you guys have seen that would be your advice to people listening that are wanting their resume to kind of float to the top instead of stay even in the middle or the bottom, because they really are such a top tier candidate, but maybe they don't know how to put that on paper?
Yeah. I'll answer mine with an example that happened pretty recently. We had a candidate who they were bivocational, so they were working the secular world and then they were also doing ministry, but they submitted a resume that was just their secular experience. So it was only things that they were doing, and like they were doing some sales and recruiting and things like that. And they were applying to be a full-time worship and youth minister. And I was like, looking through the resume, and I said, man, there's no type of ministry experience or nothing under hobbies, like nothing to where, I almost for a quick second was like, did you apply to the right role?
Yeah, did you mean to apply to something else?
And sure enough, once I, decided to give this person a chance, get on a call with them, and then they shared like, oh, yeah, I've actually have been on the side part-time leading a youth ministry of 50 kids for the past 5 years. And he even mentioned, he said, this is my first time looking for a ministry role full time.
Wow.
And I didn't know what kind of resume to submit, and I didn't know what information was important.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a great learning experience for him to know, like, oh, I should probably put this, even if it was unpaid or even if it was not professional, it was still experience that would have given him the ability to rise up.
Yeah, that's a great example.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah. I'd say any kind of volunteer experience, or if you're trying to move into the nonprofit world and you're currently in the business world, if you serve on a board, anything like that. So really any experience you have, even outside of where you get paid in your 9 to 5, and that's relevant, feel free to put that on your resume.
Yeah. That's good.
And we're talking about evaluating what to put on, what not to put on. And maybe you're an individual who's not sure which pool they're going to be going into, and they're like, maybe I could do this. I also really like this, potentially this type of role. It's totally okay to have a couple of different resumes, and that's not misleading, but that's talking about putting your best foot forward.
Right.
You're saying, hey, okay, this is a ministry position. While it hasn't been full-time, well, maybe what was at the bottom was like volunteer or something for this resume. I'm going to put that up at the top to highlight applicable experience and work.
Right.
And so it's totally okay to format and have a few different resumes based on you seeking what's that next step in your career. Because I know a lot of people come across that fork in the road where like, I've been doing this. I'm not sure if I'm long-term for this anymore, but I have this degree or I have this experience as well, and maybe I can fall into something like that.
Yeah.
Rarely is that resume going to be the same here. So you're doing a disservice to yourself one way or another, so keeping that in mind.
That's true. Well, we always love to end our episodes by asking, what would your advice be to yourself if you could go back right as you're starting your career, fresh out of college or whatever that looks like? What advice would you give yourself?
I feel like I have to think about that. I don't know.
Do you want me to go first then?
No, we're putting planners on the spot.
Yeah,
You're
yeah,
like,
yeah.
"Oh, no.
Sorry,
Oh,
guys.
no."
Sorry, I didn't tell you about that one.
Gosh. I feel like for me, what I would tell myself is to don't make your own plans, because God laughs at our plans. And I think there's just so much pressure when you first graduate that you have to have it all figured out, because it's like when you graduate high school, and if you know college is the next step, then you have everything all figured out and know what classes you're going to take. And then when you graduate from college and you're going into the workforce, there's so much pressure on knowing what you're going to do, what your next steps are. And if you don't have it all out, that's okay. And I think I would have wished I would have told my younger self that, because I would have been more stressed out. So.
Yeah, that's good.
I would echo what you say, but I will also say, I would say timing is a big thing, just from knowing maybe when you want to go into a role. I know we talk to candidates a lot who have been wanting to go into ministry for 10 years, and then maybe they had just now found their full-time role. And so I think something is just timing's really important, of when you feel called to go to something, and the Lord, he's sovereign, but you just maybe don't know when that time is. And so kind of going with what Emily was saying, but
because no and not right now are both answers to prayer, and so continuing to seek and knock.
Definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, guys, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, this
was
fun.
We enjoyed it. Can't wait to keep working with you guys every single day.
That's right.
See you in the office every day.
See you in the office tomorrow, actually, right now.
Their commute is 30 yards back to their desk.
Not too bad.
Thanks for joining. Seriously, this has been fun.
Yep.
It was
really good stuff.
We appreciate it.
Thank you all for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening to A Higher Purpose, a Vanderbloemen podcast. If you want to listen to any other episodes, please go to vanderbloemen.com/podcast. You can also find us on all the social platforms like Instagram, TikTok, X, as well as LinkedIn. And you can stream this podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts, like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere else you want to stream it from. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.